Hello and welcome to your first assessment feedback video. Now the purpose of this video is for you to be able to listen to what I'm telling you, to go through every single question that's on that exam paper that you set, and then to listen to some of the things that we're saying when we're talking about the mark schemes, but then at the same time to go back and recomplete any questions that you didn't get full marks on. Okay, so that's the whole point and the purpose of these, is to make sure that we know exactly what we need to do in order to get full marks on each of these different exam questions. Okay, remember, you can pause it, stop it and rewind it at any time if there's any information that you missed or don't understand. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this paper question by question. Now the first question that you had to answer is one that we've kind of talked about in class. It was all about constructive and destructive waves. Okay, so the question asked you for the differences between the constructive and destructive waves, and it was a 4-mark question. Now it was a 4-mark question that basically was assessment objective 1, which is all about your knowledge, which asked for 4 marks simply about the differences between constructive and destructive waves. Now you cannot say one has a strong swash and one has a strong backwash, okay, because you're saying the direct opposites of one another. So in an exam that would only get you 1 mark. Now if we look down the list of what I've got there, you've got a list of all of the things that would have got you marks. So you could have talked about the differences in swash and backwash, the differences in processes such as which ones give you erosion, which ones give you deposition. You might have got information about the wave heights and the wave length, and actually that's quite sophisticated, or a lot more sophisticated at least if you're thinking about it from an A-level perspective. Your wave frequency, okay, or also the way that it breaks onto the shore. So is it a plunging breaker or is it a spilling breaker? Okay, now most of you did reasonably well on that, okay, but you were limiting yourself at 2 marks purely because you didn't recognise that you couldn't just say the opposite of the other one in order to be able to pick up the marks. Now the next question was a skills question. This skills question asked you for image analysis. So you had a picture, okay, and you should have it in front of you right now, and on that picture you've got a cliff line and you've got some erosion that's taking place, and it basically asks you what evidence you've got. Now you wrote lots of things, okay, now broadly speaking I've summarised some of them up here at the top. So now might be a good opportunity for you to add anything that you could possibly have missed off. Most of you picked out that the houses are obviously quite close to the cliff edge, which is very unnatural, which could be evidence that there's erosion. There's vegetation which is sitting at the edges of the tops of the cliff, so if you look at that you'll be able to see that quite clearly. Now this piece of coastline is slumping, okay, so there's rotational slumping and mass movement that's going on, and you can see that there is lots of debris on the beach, okay, so you can see that that layer of impermeable clay, okay, it has slumped down and has formed a little bit of stuff on the beach. There's evidence of broken fences, okay, where there would have been fences along the coastline. These are now broken because of the erosion. You've also got in the background some evidence that there's broken revetments, okay, some of you put groins, okay, that's fine, I think I accepted that within this exam answer, or that there was some previous attempts at coastal management. So if they've made previous attempts at coastal management, obviously that tells us that there is erosion that is occurring on the coast. Now I've underlined this, do not explain mass movement, okay, it's all about boxing the command word. The command word in the question said that you needed to describe using the evidence, okay, it didn't say explain the processes that are occurring in this video, so try not to overcomplicate it or make it more complicated than it needs to be. Okay, the next question was about dynamic equilibrium on the coast. Now I have to say the vast majority of you did well on this question, okay, and it was the question that you probably did the best. Now the first thing that I would point out is if you didn't do so, you needed to point out that dynamic equilibrium is all about making sure that you can achieve balance, okay, within the coastal system. So if you haven't mentioned the word balance, then there's a little bit more that you need to make sure that you can include. Okay, I've put on their example. So you needed to give an example. Now the best example that we gave was where sediment was being recycled within the system. So lots of you talked about the fact that there could be sediment on a beach. During a storm, that sediment is taken back out to sea by the strong backwash. Then it's deposited and it forms an offshore bar. Okay, and then in times of storms that offshore bar will be destroyed and then new constructive waves will bring the sediment back onto the beach, okay, which means that we've got a balance in terms of the amount of sediment that we've got in that system between our inputs and outputs, okay. Most of you did that really well, but make sure that you mention that this is a negative feedback loop and that the whole thing is in dynamic equilibrium, because if you don't mention that, you're going to be leaving yourself short of a few marks. Okay, the final question was a really tough one, okay? And I will admit, because this is a new A-level, there aren't many questions around at the moment, so I decided to kind of make one up that was based on the coastal zone. Now, the question said, using figure 1 below, explain why the features of the beach vary across the profile of the coastal zone, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get that diagram up here so that you can start to have a little look at it, okay? Now, when I'm talking about the coastal zone, what I was focusing on, or what I wanted you to focus on, is how we might get different processes in different areas. So for example, where you've got your trough, that trough could have been created by the plunging breakers that we get from destructive waves, okay, just out there in that breaker zone, okay, or in between the breaker zone and the surf zone, on the inshore offshore area, okay. It might have been that the beach face, where you've got this swash zone, there is a predominance of constructive waves, and those constructive waves spend their time building beaches, okay, and that's something that you could have talked about. You could have talked about how where it's shallower here, the shallower water creates friction and generates those plunging breakers and generates some of those more destructive waves in the offshore area as they move inshore. You could also talk about the berms. Now, you got a bit confused here. Now, you're right, berms do quite often have deposition, particularly seaweed that's on there. But because they're quite far into the back shore, these berms are usually formed when we get some kind of storm event that pushes the sediment or pushes the seaweed beyond the realms of what is usually the tidal limit, okay? So it's worth bearing that in mind. So I wanted to know how the different processes may have varied across each of the different sections of the coastal zone. But it was a really, really tough question. So have a look at the diagram again and see what you can come up with. Okay, right, now it's over to you. Remember, you can rewind, okay, you can go through this again at any time, but I need you to try and complete that and to try and get yourselves full marks, because ultimately we want full marks when it comes to the exam.